Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Well, welcome to Relationships Inside Out, where today we're joined by Dr. Zephon Lister of Loma Linda University. And today we're going to talk about the science of prayer.
We're so excited to have him here.
Very excited. Welcome.
Good morning. Do you want to share a little bit about yourself and what you do and your work project, all those kinds of things?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Zephon Lister, I am a professor at Loma Linda University. My background actually was in theology. So I first started out in pastoral ministry for a little while, but then kind of felt the need to integrate kind of mental health and relational health as part of that. And so I kind of added on and pivoted to doing marriage and family therapy for the last 20 years. And so I've really found it meaningful to kind of integrate kind of faith and mental health, religion and mental health in my practice and my research. So I'm excited about this topic. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and you have a book coming out that's on this topic, which we're excited to read, and we'll obviously provide a link to that to the listeners when it is released.
Yeah.
Tell us a little about, we talk about, go ahead. Sorry to see that.
No, yeah, definitely excited about that. The book is called Breakthrough Prayer. And it's just really my own personal journey around trying to understand what prayer is, how it works, and how I found it to be kind of a meaningful practice in my life. And so hopefully in the next 6 weeks or so, we'll be wrapping up edits and that will be out for those who might have an interest.
So exciting.
That's great. Yeah, we talk about prayer. Can you define that for us?
Prayer, I think a lot of times people think about prayer strictly kind of a spiritual kind of experience or spiritual ritual. But I think when we think about the science of prayer, I think we're really talking about being able to create intentional, focused, quiet space where we can reflect internally about finding balance in our lives, and then also looking externally to areas of gratitude or areas of peace, joy, or fulfillment. So I think it's definitely an area that for many is deeply connected to a physical God or real God. But I think for many, prayer can just simply be a practice of renewal and restoration.
I love that perspective. So I identify as Christian. I've said that before on here. And if I talk about prayer or the way I practice my faith, it inherently has this religious undertone to it. And I love that you're expanding it beyond that it doesn't have to mean religion or Christianity or whatever it might be, that it can be all encompassing.
And I love that because you and I published a research study and it was just cross-sectional, meaning it was just correlational, one point in time. You can't make any causal, conclusions from it, but there was the prayer and how it's influencing diabetes management. Well, a lot of the feedback we got was, are we going to get diabetes because we don't pray? Well, it being all encompassing is in the benefits we're going to talk about here shortly. Doesn't mean that you have to be spiritual religious for it to benefit from it.
That's exactly right. And I think when we think about prayer, particularly from kind of a scientific level, we really think about it as like a relaxation practice, right? So think about it in terms of mindfulness. Think about it in terms of meditation, that it's really a way of, being intentional about focusing the mind, quieting the mind on areas that are going to lend to a physical health and benefit. There's also a relational component of prayer. And we'll talk about this a little bit later about what happens when we actually pray for others, right? And I draw a distinction between praying about others versus praying for others, because, that there is a difference on how we kind of experience prayer in our relationships as well.
Will you break that down? I loved that distinction. Will you break that down?
Yeah, so definitely. So when we think about, oftentimes we pray about people, and what that means is, we would say, as we're praying, help me to deal with this person. This person is really getting on my nerves. Move them out of my way. We have all these, prayers about people and what they're doing to us or how we're feeling towards them. But when we kind of look at kind of prayer in a way that is relationship building, we think about praying for people. right? And there's this sense of, I don't know what they're going through, right? And so if you're a person of faith, you say, God, I don't know what this person is going through, but help me to have more compassion for them. Help me to have a more patience with them, really change my heart, right? Help me to be able to have a different perspective. Help me to see them through your eyes, right? But we notice that even if you're not necessarily appealing to a higher power, when we take the time to really just think about the other person, kind of starts to increase empathy, right? That when we start to look for what is going on with them, what is happening in their experience, when we start to look at things from their perspective, it changes the way that we then think about them. It changes the way that we are, that there are feelings and emotions that we may have about the experience. I remember working with one client. She came in and we were talking about, a conflict that she was having with her sister. And, they were always in conflict. They were always fighting, and the relationship was very strained. And she was a person of faith. And so one session she came, we spent the whole session and she was just venting the whole session. And I said, would you be willing to do an experiment with it? And so she kind of looked at me and was like, okay, well, what do what's on your mind? And I said, I know you're a person of faith. And I said, would you be willing to pray not about your sister over the next 30 days? Would you be willing to pray for her? To pray that whatever things that she may be navigating, she would find strength to do that, that you would pray for providing you a more open heart to understand where she might be coming from. And initially, there was a little bit of pushback. I already pray. And I said, I think you're praying probably about her, but not for her. And talk with a little bit about that. And she said, okay, I'll give it a go. And it was very interesting over the next 3-4 sessions. When she would come in, we would kind of just do a check-in. And initially it was kind of like, well, yeah, I guess it's interesting that as I'm praying kind of for her needs or praying to better understand her, I do kind of start to notice for myself kind of wanting to be more interested and curious about what is actually happening with her. And probably around the third or fourth session, I remember coming in and saying, hey, me and my sister had a conversation this week and it turned out pretty well. And I said, well, what happened? What do you think was different? And she said, we started to kind of go down that same pattern. We started to kind of, into the same predictable kind of cycle that we were going. But I just paused and I just said, I just want to start over and I want to understand better what's going on for you. And that pause she said, was because she had been praying for her all these weeks. And that pause for the sister, all of a sudden I was like, this is new. This is interesting. What's going on here? And it changed the entire dynamic. And she was like, wow. I'm so appreciative that shift in perspective. And so I think even with that, and I think, when we think about prayer, what it not only does for us, but what it can do for others as we interact with them as well, in terms of increasing empathy, increasing compassion. And all of this is actually in the literature. It's so interesting where, as I was starting out my own journey, how I even started was I was frustrated, right? I'm a person of faith and I was just like, why does it seem like prayer is random sometimes? Like I pray for one thing and something happens. I pray other times and doesn't seem like anything is happening. And I really wanted to try to understand how does prayer work? What happens? Yeah. And as I got into looking into it, I actually got into the research, being an academic, and I was blown away that there was literally thousands of articles on prayer and how prayer works. And how, when I say how prayer works, meaning, is it some special, genie in the sky? The research doesn't seem to bear that out. Matter of fact, the largest study out of Harvard years ago by, I think it's Herbert Benson, actually found that intercessory prayer, this idea of praying for someone, didn't necessarily yield a whole lot of benefit, right? It wasn't like, oh, we found this was significant. So really the studies that really are demonstrating efficacy in prayer, and the science of prayer around, prayer for what happens inside. Right? And as I started to better understand that, it made a lot more sense. And it started to kind of resonate a little bit more from a strictly kind of personal level, how prayer could work for me.
Yeah.
It's interesting. As you were talking, I'm thinking about how it shifts from other focused or a loss of power, even in that way, right? It's about them changing. They need to do the things, to self-focus, personal
Right.
responsibility, taking back my onus, my power. And there can be great shifts in that when I'm working on what's actually mine versus saying, nah, it's you, boo. It's not me.
What do you mean? I pray for myself all the time. I don't receive any benefits. Like, I need to win the lottery. I need. So do you mind sharing a little bit about what you found with how prayer benefits us, even on a physiological level?
Yes, there's been several studies looking at what prayer actually does in the brain. And so so what some of the research has found is, and when I talk about prayer in this sense, it's not like when you sit down in front of your food and just, kind of throw up a few words, good, good meat, thank God, let's eat, right? So it's not, that kind of, really quick, but when there's kind of intentional kind of like focused time that we set apart to really just connect with ourselves, to reflect, to pull in gratitude, to pull in thanksgiving, but some to even appeal to a higher power, right? That when we engage in that kind of focus, kind of type of prayer, what happens in the brain is that the amygdala actually settles quite a bit, that they found that new neural pathways kind of get created in terms of looking for gratitude or looking for strength or defaulting to finding, resilience, right? So all of those things that have been found in various types of studies. One interesting study looking at addiction and cravings found that, when individuals during a craving would pray, that those cravings would kind of start to ease. And so they started to look at, well, what's happening in the brain while this is happening? And so what they found is when they were engaged in this prayer time, that the action center of their brain was quieted, meaning that, the thing that was driving them to go pursue, or to fulfill this craving as they prayed was actually quieted. And so as they would pray, they would literally be able to have more control over that craving, because literally in the study, they were saying you can't pray and then get up and fulfill the craving. And so as they were praying, it actually helped to ease some of those, cravings around pursuing, in this case, alcohol. So there's some very interesting things that are literally happening in the brain when we take the time to kind of focus the mind in that very intentional way.
That's so powerful to think about that choice of prayer or that mindfulness, right?
Mhm.
That time
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
sit and think and be, how much of an impact it can have, not just on the mind, but on the body, and then probably on your relationships, your parenting. And it has this ripple effect, I'd imagine.
Oh, you mean if I'm calmer, I can handle the dishes not being done better?
Yeah, you should work on that. Yeah.
Dr. Bliss, so you talked about the amygdala. Can you share a little bit why that's important, that it's soothing or calming down?
A great question. So I appreciate that, because so when we think about what does the amygdala do? So the amygdala really is the part of the brain that is to help us to sort out threat and anxiety. So it's really the part that helps us to stay safe. Right? It says danger, 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 right? But sometimes our amygdalas can kind of I kind of call it almost like our anxious best friend, where it's just kind of like, hey, something's going on, and pay attention to this. And so it can really sometimes end up creating a lot of stress on the body. And so it's an important part. It's an important part of our bodies in the sense that an important part of our brains is because it helps us to recognize threat, right? But,
Sure.
but when, but it can also kind of take on life its own, particularly if we've experienced trauma or if we're kind of having compound stress, or if we're experiencing kind of like prolonged, kind of challenges in our day-to-day life, our amygdala can kind of get stuck on high in some ways. And so that being stuck on high starts to, really keep the body in a heightened state of stress. And that starts to really, wear down the body. We become more sick. We become less able to manage the relationship around us. We become more irritable. We can become more depressed. We can become more anxious. So when the amygdala is kind of stuck in a high stress state, it starts to affect every aspect of our lives. And one of the things that becomes important is, well, how do we, and what kind of in terms of the nervous system, this would be the sympathetic nervous system, right? This would be, the sympathetic nervous system is getting activated. And so what we're looking at is, well, what are practices that we can do to activate a parasympathetic response? Or in other words, what are things that we can do to help to bring down the amount of arousal, the amount of, energy the amygdala is giving to us to kind of stay super aware, super alert, super stressed. And so one of the things that we notice with prayer is that it helps to activate the relaxation response, this parasympathetic response, where the amygdala is able to kind of reset and then kind of reassess the threats around. And so the things that seem to be overwhelming, once we take that step back, we actually are able to gain perspective and to respond more appropriately. We move from that survival stance of kind of fight, flight, or freeze to a much more kind of like engaged response. Instead of being reactive, we become responsive. And so I think that's one of the interesting things around how prayer can be helpful in terms of, kind of literally helping to quiet the mind enough to reset it, to then be able to kind of make, choices that would be more, more aligned with what we'd want to do versus kind of just reacting based on kind of the stress that we're experiencing in the moment.
Wow. Will you speak on, so we think about prayer, we think of it as like an individual practice. I do this by myself. I'm quiet and alone. Will you speak on what it is or what the research says about praying together? Like say as a couple or a family.
So I had a chance to work on a project where we kind of looked at prayer among couples, and then also prayer in families, and does that actually have a positive effect? And there's been a few studies that have kind of looked at that as well, and we find that couples who pray together, there's this old kind of adage, a family that prays together stays together, right? And that actually kind of bears out in the research, right? That couples who pray together, again, praying for each other, praying with each other, tend to report higher levels of marital quality, higher levels of marital satisfaction, the ability to manage conflict much more effectively. And actually, interestingly enough, there was one study that actually said they had an improved sex life. And so, yeah, but I imagine part of what goes into sex is feeling connected, feeling bonded, feeling understood.
Yeah.
Right? So again, I could see where that would make sense. And so I think, what is prayer doing? Right. So I think when I get together with my partner, when I get together with my spouse, my girlfriend, my boyfriend, when we get together and I hear them praying for me, lifting up the things that I'm struggling with, communicating how they are seeking to understand and that strength would be given to me, that strength would be given to us. If I'm listening to that as a partner, I'm going to feel more connected to you. I'm going to say, wow, this person's really, invested in what's happening here, and vice versa, right? Additionally, we're taking time, right? For those individuals whose love language is quality time, when we're very intentional about coming together, right, and saying, I'm blocking everything out. I'm blocking out work. I'm blocking out the kids, blocking out, TV. In this space, it's you and I, and we're talking about how we can support each other, how we can be responsive to each other, how we can be aware of each other's needs, and how we can together talk about how we can support each other in meeting those needs. It's very powerful. It's transformative. And we actually noticed something similar with parents and kids. And I think, as a matter of fact, I think Greg and I worked on another project together where we were looking at parenting and kind of religiosity as well. And prayer was one of those variables that actually was associated with authoritative parenting. And so again, why might that be the case? Well, again, the same idea, right? If I'm sitting down, in order to pray for my kids, I need to know what my kids are going through, right? So that means I got to sit down and got to talk with them. Right? And as I'm talking with them and I'm understanding what they're going through, my kid is, wow, my parents are listening to me. They really are interested in what's going on. And as I'm listening to what's going on with my child, it's also having an influence on, boy, I didn't know what they were going. Man, I didn't know that was something that was bothering them. So that's going to now influence how I'm going to interact with them. And so that authoritative parenting, that parenting of, we have to have good boundaries. We need to have structure, but we need to have warmth. We need to have support. We need to have empathy. We need to have understanding. Again, we see how creating a space for prayer also supports that type of parenting as well. And so I think that becomes another part. Again, it's also leveraging kind of prayer and I think by extension, what I would say family worship within the family. So in my home, from the time the kids were infants until the time they left for college, we tried to have family worship every night, right? And for us, it was about, of course, coming together and kind of, reconnecting, as a family, not just at a spiritual level, but at an interpersonal level. We would, how are things going? What stresses? We took that time to kind of talk about things that we felt were very important. So this is the time where we would talk about relationships, girlfriends and boyfriends, social media, and how to manage social media, the importance of integrity and responsibility and honesty. And so it created that venue to kind of instill some of those values, some of those things that were important to us. And it was something that that they expected now. And so every evening it was like, okay, we're coming together, right? And we were able to, to talk about some of these things that are so important. In addition to, at the end, having a time where everybody would then pray. And each person would pray. And as we would pray, again, is that sense of we would hear each other praying for each other. We would hear each other praying for the struggles that we were going through. We would hear each other praying and just in the act of, again, experiencing shared prayer, we were able to feel closer to each other, connected to each other, and to feel more equipped to respond to each other's needs. And so prayer is definitely very powerful and meaningful at an individual level, but I think the relational benefits of prayer are as meaningful and as significant. So yeah, I think that's such an important area, and I think an area that could definitely be leveraged both in terms of couples, but as families.
I love that. And I want to back up to something you said, authoritative parenting. I just wanted to define that. Those who don't know, authoritative, it has like it sounds bad. It's actually the gold star of a parenting style. It is both high in structure, but also high in warmth. Authoritarian is that more cold type of parenting, or can be perceived as cold, where there's high in structure and discipline, low in warmth. And I wanted to clarify that because sometimes, even from a religious standpoint, there's this assumption that parents who are religious or where there's prayer engaged, they're much more structured and disciplined, and sometimes without the warmth. And I love that you're showing that there's actually warmth in this. It's not, I don't know, I hear that connotation all the time, and maybe that's just the people I'm around. But I love that you point out that actually it's both, that there's real love happening in prayer, that there's connection and investment in one another, a listening in one another, and then trying to tend to one another in a gentle and tender way.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think it is that since it does a couple of different things. Since we've talked about kind of authoritarian and authoritative, we can talk about some of the other ones as well, right? So we think about passive,
Sure.
right? So when we think about passive, it's someone who's kind of really permissive, right? But again, if I'm praying for my family, I'm invested in their well-being. I'm engaged, right? I care about what's happening, right? So if I'm taking the time to actually lift your name up, if I'm taking the time to actually evoke your experience, I'm invested, right? And so again, it
100%.
speaks to how do I become really involved in what's happening with my child, or with my partner. And so I think, each of those things. So, the reason I believe that it is linked to that idea of authoritative type parenting is because not only am I kind of praying for them and developing more empathy and compassion and perspective, not only am I hearing from them what's going on for them and how I can be responsive, but you can't pray for someone and not be invested, right? So there's certain part of me that says
The care.
I care, right? And so I think I can't be passive. It's very active, right? I can't be super permissive, right? It's something that becomes important that I make sure that I'm putting the pieces in place for the prayers that I'm praying to actually take place, right? So it's almost, prayer in some ways is almost like it's your initial catalyst for getting up and doing something, right? So to pray and just not do anything is a wasted prayer, right? You pray and then you get up and you do, right? And so I think that, again, another part of how prayer can be helpful, because it gives you an opportunity to really hone in on intentional living, right? And saying, okay, where do I want to put my energy? Where do I want to put my focus? What are the things that are important to me? Where are the areas that I feel like that I need to be attended to, whether it's stress or whether in priority? And then as I'm able to finish prayer, I'm able to get up and then say, okay, then what do I need to do? And, so I think that when we look, I'm a Christian, so when I look in the Bible, prayer is always accompanied by action, right? So it's not prayer and inaction, it's always prayer and action. And I think it's the same thing. If I'm going to pray for help, then I need to get up and begin to live more healthy, right? If I'm going to pray for my relationship, I need to get up and start to act in a way that is going to make my relationship stronger, more healthier. So I think it's that there's that action component where we're able to kind of reset, focus, and then move.
Beautiful.
One question that comes up for me as we're talking about prayer, and I know earlier we distinguished between the about and for, but these studies or anything that you've been kind of reading through, have they talked about how people are praying? Like, is there a way? I feel like there's a lot of, I don't know, maybe anxiety about if I'm doing it right or things like that. And is there anything about whether that matters or not? I mean, you've looked at a whole different ways, and I just kind of want to highlight that and maybe talk a little bit more distinctively about the how.
So I think there are definitely some hows. So there is definitely some research that does give some ideas around types of prayer that tend to be more effective and other types of prayer that tend to be maybe less effective. So kind of a couple principles. I think one principle is that when we're praying, that we're appealing to gratitude, we're appealing to compassion, we're appealing to grace, we're appealing to focus instead of focusing on what's wrong and the stress or the pain or perseverating over the things that are not going right. There actually have been several studies that says that not all prayer is the same, right? So when I pray and I focus on the problems, when I pray and I focus on the stress, when I pray and I'm perseverating over what's not going well, those prayers don't tend to yield kind of the same kind of relaxation response or the same improvements in terms of depression and anxiety than when prayers are focused on looking for strength, looking for compassion, looking for empathy, looking for gratitude, focusing on the present and not, too kind of caught up in what has happened or what will happen. So definitely, kind of having prayers that are more along those lines seem to kind of be more helpful at debating some of those health qualities. Length of prayer, there's, if you look around, there's different, kind of studies that looked at 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I don't think there's anything conclusive about how long I need to pray. Do I need to pray for 2 minutes or do I need to pray for 20 minutes? I think where a lot of research, there's two things that tend to kind of bear out a little bit. One is the more I do it, the quicker the benefits of prayer are become present in the body, which is similar to most anything, right? So whether it's exercise, whether it's meditation, whether it's mindfulness, like the more that I do it, the quicker my body recognizes those cues and is able to kind of activate that parasympathetic response or activate that relaxation response, right? So I think it's starting off and just making it consistent and making it a habit. I think the second component is, as I kind of is really wanting to make sure that that I'm creating an environment that is conducive to creating that relaxation response. So yes, I can pray anywhere, right? So I can pray on the bus, I can pray in the elevator, I can pray on my commute on the work. So I think we can pray anywhere, but what we're also finding is really having that intentional time, that quiet space where I am playing my music, I have my journal, I am, reading, scripture, reading inspirational stories, I'm reading things that are positive, I'm focusing on gratitude, I'm focusing on strength. So creating that atmosphere of kind of healing and restoration and renewal and being intentional about creating a space for that. We have found, that it seems to kind of be connected to really experiencing some of those kind of physical and emotional benefits of prayer. So those would be some of the things that I would kind of think about. But again, you can pray anywhere, and there's this one passage of scripture that says pray without ceasing, right? And I don't think that means that, you just are constantly just walk around with your head in the sky, right? And your eyes are closed, right? But what I think what it really means is just maintaining a spirit of prayer, maintaining a spirit of contemplation, maintaining a spirit of mindfulness as I'm going about the day. And as I do that, I tend to respond to life differently when I do that. And so those would be some ways I think would be helpful as we think about how we may be able to kind of implement prayer in our lives.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I love that. 'Cause you talk about content, frequency, and place. Is there anything about behavior? Like you have to drop to your knees and you can't intertwine your fingers, or you can't, like, do they have any control in that? Or
Good
is that
question.
kind of?
No, that's a great question. So I don't think that there's anything that I read that would say any of those types of things necessarily would be essential. I think it's really, at the end of the day, it's finding a posture that is meaningful to you. So I used to, kind of like traditionally, right? I would get on my knees, I would close my eyes, I would pray in my head, right? And, probably a good percentage of those times I would probably end up falling asleep or end up drifting. My mind is drifting, and I'm thinking about the movie that came out 3 years ago. As my mind is kind of wandering. So I think I, I think so. One of the things that, as I was kind of starting to look around about what how do we do prayer, is kind of what you're talking about. How do we do prayer? I was actually amazed at how many different ways that we could pray, right? I came across things like prayer walks, where you would get up and you'll walk in nature, or or you just take a walk. And as you're walking, you're talking, you're walking and talking, and, came across, journaling. So prayer journaling, where you actually pull out and you write write the impressions that you're experiencing, and different types of journaling. So I found gratitude journaling. And so what are things that that I'm grateful for and thankful for? Strength journaling, right? So when you're going through a tough time, looking at, well, what are the areas of strength that I can identify that I exhibited today as I'm going through this challenge? And actually just writing down your prayers, right? Where you literally would, instead of talking your prayers, you kind of write your prayers, and you can actually kind of track, these prayers and how they kind of are being addressed and changed in your life. And I came across prayer calendars where, you each day you would kind of identify a particular area that you would want to focus on. So I'm going to focus on praying for others today. And then tomorrow I'm going to focus on, really focusing on, myself, and what are the things in me that need to be kind of attended to. I'm going to pray about, my station in life, and, just being really intentional about, these different days I'm going to be maybe praying for different things. And so there's lots of different types of areas that I kind of came across. And I was like, really, really cool. Praying out loud, was something. And so that's something that I've actually kind of incorporated. I've tried all of those and I like all of them. But praying out loud is something that I have found to be particularly meaningful, because in some ways I feel like I'm actually having a conversation. So sometimes I would be praying and then I would just stop, right? I would just pause and just kind of just wait. And sometimes the issue I was addressing, or the person that I was thinking about, or the challenge that I was experiencing, sometimes I would feel impressed with certain insights, or would be certain tech would come to mind, or certain ways of responding or acting may come to mind. I remember, like, I was talking, again, I was talking to God, right? About this situation, and I felt impressed. Hey, you should call this person. Don't talk to me. Sure. Wait, talk to me, but you should talk to them too. And I was like, okay, I was hoping to just kind of leave it with you. But so after I kind of prayed, I, later on that day, I kind of called them and hey, just want to kind of check in with you, let you know what's kind of going on with me, and able to actually have a really meaningful conversation and address the issue, resolve the issue. And I don't think I would have done that if I hadn't kind of prayed, right? I think I would have just kind of like let it go, swept it on the rug, carried it around, have the resentment, have the bitterness. But, as I'm praying and as I'm creating space, I felt like, okay, I got to act on this. I need to do something. And so I think that, there's lots of creative ways to kind of have prayer become a part of your life. And it doesn't have to be a stale, sometimes I actually came across people who would like artistic forms of prayer. So they would do prayer dance or prayer art, or they would write a song they would write a song in prayer. And, I'm creative, but I'm not artistic. Right. But so I look at that and say, boy, that would be pretty cool. But, I don't think my stick figures would be representative of everything I would want to kind of bring it to my problems to God. But, for those who really find they communicate through expression, through art, that becomes another, could be another meaningful way to kind of, again, express those prayers. So your prayer time may actually be painting a picture. Your prayer time may be actually writing a poem, right? Your prayer time may actually be writing a song. That actually might be the time in which you're able to express, the depths of your heart, to express the things that you're going through. And that in itself becomes your expression of prayer. So there's very, very interesting and creative ways to kind of implement, kind of this prayer experience or the prayer time into your life.
And it's a daily practice. It's not just when I need to ask for something or when things are going awry practice. It is a daily investment in this intentional time, intentional reflection, intentional, where's my role kind of conversation.
And whatever that looks like for you. But interesting, I guess what I'm gleaning from what you're saying is that the research isn't stating you must be on a wooden plank in pain on your knees, praying to receive the benefit.
Matter of fact, it would probably to the contrary, right? That this is probably not useful to be on a wooden plank, right? It's probably not useful to be in pain, right? That I think that, but I'm glad you actually mentioned that, because I think there's a lot of human conventions that we've imposed on prayer that actually have taken away from what I believe was its original intent, right? That oftentimes we've made a prayer transactional versus relational, right? I've done these things. I've kind of done my part, and therefore I deserve these things. When we take that attitude into prayer, we're really setting ourselves up for failure, right? Because we develop kind of an expectation. Well, I did my part, so then you need to do your part. And rather being relational, right? So in relationships, is there a give and take? Of course, right? But are there times when there's going to be more giving and other times there's going to be more taking? Yeah, because that's what the way relationships work. And I think at its heart, prayer is really relational. And I think making that shift from looking at it as a transactional experience to a relational experience where we're building trust, when we're relating with ourselves, when we're relating with, for those who believe in a higher power, relating with a higher power, that all of a sudden we realize that it's not a scoreboard, it's building connection, it's building communication, it's building intimacy, it's building knowledge of each other, of ourselves. And so when we do that, then it's kind of like, well, where do relationships strive? Where do relationships strive as well? But where do relationships thrive? Well, relationships thrive when I know that I can depend on that person, so that even when we go through tough times, that we can lean on each other to get through those tough times. And we don't need to, we don't want to create a relationship that is kind of being, stressful from the very beginning, right? And in the same breath, I think sometimes we make prayer, and we have made prayer, a stressful experience. I have to do it in this particular way. I have to do it for this particular time. It's not supposed to be something that's comfortable. I need to feel pain. I need to feel suffering. I need to feel anxiety. I need to feel anguish. But I think those are human conventions. I just don't see that represented when we see how prayer was really, and I believe what was intended for us. I think it was designed for healing. I think it was designed for restoration. I think it was designed for building resilience. I think it was designed to be able to help us to reach out beyond ourselves and to realize in all of the uncertainties of life, in all of the stresses of life, in all of the pains of life, there's a constant, right? And that constant I'm able to hold to because that constant is love. That constant is faithfulness. That constant only desires the best. And if I hold on to that constant, then even the challenging times become a little bit more manageable, because I know that constant is, and so that for me, what really made prayer and making that shift in my mind from being really transactional to relational really, really made a big difference.
And that doesn't mean it has to be the higher power, right?
It doesn't. I think it could be, it could be in your day-to-day life, the way that I connect with my community around me, the way that I connect with myself internally, the way that I kind of look at how I can, again, this idea of there's this, love your neighbor as yourself, right? But how can I love my neighbor as myself if I don't love myself? Right.
Fair point.
If you hate yourself, you hate your neighbor. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, right. No, I think right. No, I think that's no. I 100%. I think you're right. I think you're 100% correct. That if I don't know how to love myself, then how am I equipped to then love those around me? And so it does start with, being able to find healing, to find meaning, to find connection individually. Then from there, to use that journey, that process, that experience to then, and I think this is important, that if you stop there, you're gonna end up eating yourself up from the inside out, right? That it can't stop there. That once you learn those things, that it has to be channeled outward, right? So it has to be channeled out to others. It has to be channeled out to the community. It has to be channeled out to the oppressed, to the suffering, to those who are in need of strength and encouragement and resources. That if it's not channeled out, it just ends up collapsing on itself. And so I think that it's important to learn to love ourselves, but the purpose of learning to love ourselves is so that we can learn how to love others, right? And if we stop at, I just need to love myself. If we stop at, I just need to make sure that my needs are taken care of. If we stop there, I believe we'll implode, right? That it really does require, I need to learn this so that then I can, right? And as we do those things, then the world around us becomes much more, each person in the world then becomes benefited from the other. And then as a society, as a community, we all begin to grow and develop. And so I think, as a person of faith, I would say, I think having a higher power continues to amplify that. And I think we were created for that reason. But if you're not a person of faith, I think that those benefits are still present because that's the way things are. Things have that's the way I think things are designed.
Love that.
With social connection, yeah.
So as we're starting to wrap up, Zephon, do you have any last minute tidbits about prayer or takeaways for our listeners?
A couple of different things. Kind of similar to I said to my client, I'm wondering if you would do an experiment with me, right? That I wonder if you would take maybe the next week, right? Just to take the next week and practice with prayer. And I want you to do some very specific things. One, I want you to dedicate 10 to 15 minutes, right? So take 10 to 15 minutes out of your day. I want you to take 10 to 15 minutes at the beginning of your day, and then another 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the day, right? So I want you to take 10 to 15 minutes for the next 7 days. And in that 10 to 15 minutes, I just want you to focus on three things. I would want you to focus on the idea of awareness, the idea of balance, and the idea of compassion.
Mm.
So awareness, I want you to be aware of what's going on with me internally. What stress is experiencing? What things am I beating myself up on? My inner critic. What's happening around me, right, that I maybe need to be more attuned to? My spouse, my kid, things at work, things at school, right? So focus on an area of awareness, right? And then think about it as ABC, right? And then B, focus on an area of balance. So do I feel like my life is in balance or out of balance? If it's feeling out of balance, then again, this is where the awareness comes in. What are the parts of my life that feel out of balance, and what can I do to then bring more balance into my life, right? And then C is compassion, right? So how do I develop more compassion for myself? How do I develop more compassion for others? So, because sometimes when we have the awareness, we're like, right. And then the balance, boy, but the compassion say, it's okay. We're all human. We're all looking for the awareness. We're all looking for that balance. Be kind to yourself, right? And as we learn to be kind to ourselves, then we can also learn to be kind to others. Is there someone in your life you need to give more compassion to, right? Is there someone in your life that maybe you've been holding on to some unforgiveness or some bitterness, and maybe you're saying, I think I want to just take this time to give compassion, right? I'm going to release them. So 10 to 15 minutes, awareness, balance, and compassion. Again, in that awareness, be aware of gratitude. What is one thing that I can be grateful for, right? Be aware of areas of strength, right? Be aware. So that awareness is not just what are the problems in my life? What are the challenges in my life? Who do I need to focus on in my life, right? Awareness is also what are the things that I need to focus in on in terms of gratitude, in terms of strength, so that awareness, that balance, and then compassion. So 10 to 15 minutes in the morning, 10 to 15 minutes in the evening, ABC, awesome. Awareness, balance, compassion. And then for a bonus, if you're willing to do it, journal, write down the things that you identify, in terms of the areas, and just notice for yourself, what things do you notice? So at the end of the week, reflect back. And this is why journaling becomes important, because sometimes, you look back 7 days and we can't even remember what we ate yesterday. So look back over the week, right? And say, how do I feel different in my body? How do I feel different in my mind? Is there anything I noticed different in the way that in the relationship around me and the way that I'm interacting in those relationships? What are those things that I may be noticing as I take that time intentionally, in the morning and the evening to kind of just ABC, to be aware, to find balance, and to give compassion. So those would be kind of my takeaways for those who had a chance to kind of spend some time with us today.
I appreciate those takeaways. I've appreciated listening to you this whole episode. We don't talk about prayer often unless it's within a church setting. And so I appreciate you really diving into the science, the backing of it, the different variations of it. I'm deeply grateful for this conversation.
It helps it make it relatable, because again, that idea of prayer, sometimes it's cringeworthy for a lot of people, because it's heavily assumed it's only if you are religious, right? So I love that you brought in pieces and ways that those who may not have that belief system can still engage in prayer as a concept and benefit from it.
So as always, to our listeners, if you have questions for us, if you have questions for our guests, please feel free to email us at relationshipsinsideout. And thank you again for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you. And then for those who might be interested in doing a little deeper dive about kind of my own personal journey around prayer, I am finishing up a book that's going to be out in the next probably 4 to 6 weeks. And it's called Breakthrough Prayer. And it's my first book. So I want to give it away for free, right? So if you email me at stormproofrelationships with an S, so stormproofrelationships@gmail.com, and just put in the subject line free book and your information, your email address and your name, once the book is out, I will send you a free ebook of the copy. And then if you would like a physical copy of the book, if you would also add your address, and if you would just cover shipping and handling, I'll go ahead and send the book out for you for free. So it's been a blessing to me. I want it to be a blessing to others. And so until June 30th, I'm wanting to kind of provide the book for free for anyone who feel like it may be a benefit and a blessing to them. Thank you so much.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks.